On this episode of Business Access, we feature Don Anderson, Executive Chairman of Market Research Services Limited, the longest-standing company of its kind in the Caribbean. Home of the famous Don Anderson polls, Market Research Services Limited has a stellar track record when it comes to providing its clients with sound data for all their research needs. Today, Don reveals his secret to being successful in helping firms make multi-million-dollar decisions and predicting elections.
The bottom line is that credibility, confidentiality are key factors in every research organization. And we hold those two things very, very, very sacredly.
We also learn about his close affinity to sports and the role his family has played in his career over the years.
My name is Don Anderson, and I'm the Executive Chairman of Market Research Services Limited. I'm from a fairly large family. My dad was a pretty comfortable corporal in the police force in Port Antonio. My mother was a dressmaker, and between them they produced 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. First 5 children were all boys. I was the number 5 of the 8, and therefore I was thought perhaps to be the last of the brood. But then there were 3 afterwards. And why I say that is that there was a consistent 2-year gap between the first 5, and then there was a gap of nearly 5 years, and then the last 3 were 2 years between. So, very interesting way. I don't know what my parents had in mind, but so we came from pretty humble background, and with what they had, they were able to put us through, all of us through high school in Titchfield, and most of us through university. I would like to think that my best years were certainly the formative years in primary school. One of my really great teachers was Mrs. Sykes, the mother of the current Chief Justice. She died recently. And my Titchfield years were, again, very, very powerful years as far as my education was concerned. I had 2 different headmasters, Cap Thomas from England, and then Mr. Mortimer Geddes as one of the really strong principals that the school has had. I'd like to think when you think in terms of the academic qualifications of my siblings, I would probably be the least of the academically qualified of the lot. Because the rest of them have gone on to do big things, really big things, academically and otherwise. My oldest sibling was a professor at Harvard, and Roy, one of my other older siblings, was the justice on the Supreme Court bench, but all of the others have achieved something significant. One of my sisters, Hope, was a doctor. Unfortunately passed 2 years ago. So we've come from this pretty humble background, and I don't believe that we've forgotten where we've come from. We have used that as a launching pad for really the development of our own personalities going through life. I was a normal boy, I believe. My father was rather reserved. You know, he would come in from work and sit on the veranda in his nice little rocking chair, and he would contemplate what I don't know. He didn't talk a lot. My mom was more of the person to instill the kind of framework of discipline and that type of thing. But combined, I believe they did a good job in molding us. So I don't think we had a difficult childhood. We made do with what we had, and each of us in our own ways, kind of learned from those experiences and developed into who we became. My school days, of course, was where I began my formative sporting career, if you wish. The high point was a low point, actually, in my high school, because for reasons best known to himself, then headmaster Mortimer Geddes felt I should repeat 5th form. So I spent an extra year in 5th form, but it also meant that when they changed the school year from whatever it was, I got an extra year in sports. So I recall in my last year in schoolboy sports, they were questioning my age because I started playing school sports very early. From about 13, 14, I was a member of the school's cricket team and football team and hockey team. And so when I got into my 6th year of competition, there were questions as to whether or not I was an overage. But I was within the legal limit. So, you know, I think from there, when I graduated from Titchfield, I did A-levels. I went to work immediately at the tax office in Port Antonio and was transferred 9 months after then to Anota Bay in the tax office. And from there, I got a scholarship to the University of the West Indies. So I had 1 year of working life. I was a very senior member of the tax department in Anota Bay because I was the only high school graduate on the staff. And they made me what is called an executive assistant, which meant I was next to the collector of taxes in Anota Bay. So at a very young age, I learned what it was to manage people and to manage my time. So, and then I got this scholarship, a government scholarship, to the University of the West Indies. My older brother Roy and my older brother Winston were both graduates before or were both students at the University of the West Indies. Winston, when I was there, he was a year ahead of me. And I moved into Taylor Hall. And all 6 of my siblings who went into the University of the West Indies went through Taylor Hall. So we have a very close affinity to Taylor Hall. So moved into university, Taylor Hall, spent 3 years, graduated with a bachelor's degree in history. And then I started to do a postgraduate diploma in management, but work intervened because I was then promoted from the company I began to work with, Market Research Jamaica Limited. I was then promoted to the research executive position and then the general manager. And therefore, that kind of took precedence over my academic studies at that point in time. So even though I was accepted to read for an MSc in economics, I didn't pursue that. My opinion is unimportant. And even if you go in there with a mindset which is different from how the data comes out, that's not your business. Your business is to generate the data in the most professional way. And in the final analysis, however the data comes out, that's what you present. Market Research Services Limited is a full-fledged market research provider. By that we mean anywhere there's an information need, our organization is there to provide it. So that is the widest possible explanation or interpretation of what we do. In the last 25 years thereabout, I have become known as the pollster. But I want to put it in proper perspective because the political polling that we do is the loudest of all the work we do, but really represents about 10% of our business. Because the other 90% is conducting research for a very wide range of public sector companies, public sector entities, private sector companies, huge corporate bodies, financial institutions, manufacturing companies, name it. We have done research, and I sometimes challenge my students at UA where I teach sometimes that I don't believe you can name an industry that we have not done research in. And we have some really huge clients that we have worked along with. It's information, we gather information, we analyze data, we provide reports, we make presentations, and from what we do, huge marketing decisions are made. We've gone away from the era where a lot of business decisions used to be made from the seat of the pants, which meant that, people would sit in the boardrooms and say, I believe that this could work, And depending on who was most dominant, they would go in a particular direction. I'm happy to make the point and make it quite strong that today, there are very few companies that are making decisions without the basis of good, solid information to guide them. And I think that's where our benefit really is, in providing the kind of reliable, credible, accurate information that companies of all kinds use to make decisions. We're talking about in the political arena as well, you know. So we believe we provide a very important role, and I believe that research really is the pivot of all of our marketing activity worldwide. We pride ourselves on running a very professional organization. We, unlike a manufacturer who would sell a product that you can take and use and evaluate and so on, we have two things on which our company is built: credibility, confidentiality. We have existed in an environment where we have done work for competitive organizations in the private sector, for different political parties, and there is none that could ever say that their information has transcended where it ought not to go. The bottom line is that credibility, confidentiality are key factors in every research organization, and we hold those two things very, very, very sacredly. That is the bottom line, you know. So it's not a secret. We follow the very strict research and professional ethics that govern our profession, and we then pride ourselves on delivering credible information and to ensure that our clients' data is absolutely confidential. My move into political polling was actually initiated by the Honorable Edward Seaga. In the 1980s, when he was the Prime Minister of Jamaica, we used to do some work for a related organization called the Bustamante Institute for Public Affairs, headed by then Hector Winter. We used to do some work because Mr. Seaga wanted to know, well, how is the country progressing, and how are people feeling about things in the country? So that work was channeled through the Bustamante Institute for Public Affairs. And maybe after about 3 years of working with them, I remember going back to my office one afternoon, and my secretary told me that the Prime Minister wanted to meet with me that afternoon. I never gotten a call like that before. So I said, it has to be very important. So I dropped whatever I was doing. I headed to Jamaica House, and I was then in the presence of the Prime Minister, Mr. Seaga, Mr. Bruce Golden, Mr. Hugh Shearer. And what was this all about? We had been doing work for the Bustamante Institute of Public Affairs. And I remember Mr. Seaga taking out his little black book, which he's been known to carry around, and he says, well, what's the latest information you have from the Institute's work? When I shared that with him, he said, I'd be pleased to tell you that it's within 2% of the work that Carlstone has generated, and therefore we want you to do some work for us politically. I said, wow. That was my first political poll in the 1980s. And we then worked in the 1989 election, etc., etc., etc. So we have been in the polling business for close to 30 years. We had the benefit of working with Carl, whose shoes people sometimes say I fit for Carl and shoes, He really is the pioneer of all this market research and the political polling in particular in Jamaica. And I'm happy to have said that I've worked along with Carl in 1 or 2 projects. So, for 30 years, we have maintained a position as one of the really strong polling units in the Caribbean. And we have had the benefit of really successful political polls in almost every election in Jamaica. And the basis on which we have been able to garner this kind of reputation is the fact that we have maintained a very, very strong adherence to professionalism throughout. We guide the political parties in terms of what questions and how to shape the questions. Neutrally, not to their benefit, but neutrally, so that they can derive the clearest objective data from those polls we do. And in the final analysis, we make a presentation to the respective political parties as to the outcome and the impact. I would like to think that, by and large, those polls that we have done have been used very effectively and efficiently by the respective political parties to determine their own course of action and their own strategy. That obtains to today. I've maintained throughout, and this is something we practice in our organization, we have a very strong team. My opinion is unimportant, and I have my own opinions about the way, the data could look and so on. But the bottom line is that objectivity is the critical single component in doing good research. You have to be objective, And even if you go in there with a mindset which is different from how the data comes out, that's not your business. Your business is to generate the data in the most professional way, using proper sampling techniques, using the controls that are important, quality controls that are important throughout fieldwork, validation, etc. And in the final analysis, however the data comes out, that's what you present. The biggest, most successful, most rewarding, most exciting, most humbling games that I have been to was the Beijing Olympics of 2008. One of the big studies that we do right now is the Business and Consumer Confidence Survey. We have been running this study from 2001, and it's ongoing. Every quarter we make a presentation to the country as to what is the level of confidence that businesses have, what's the level of confidence that consumers have in the environment. And we therefore now have close to 70 quarters of data. One of the big drawbacks, and it's a pretty obvious situation, one of the big drawbacks to greater development is the whole question, this monster of crime. And when we talk to businesses, they tell us the single largest deterrent to growth is crime. All right? So there's no question that we have to find a way to harness this big problem. But in a macro way, we're heading in the right direction. But I think the growth that we could possibly achieve is stymied by the crime situation, and they also talk in terms of the level of bureaucracy, which is actually another deterrent. I will tell you though, that when you do political polls and you ask people a strange question, is the country going in the right direction or the wrong direction or what? I don't think we've ever done a study in which the public feels that the country is going in the right direction. And that's a kind of a dissonance, if you wish, but it's very easily explained. Because to a large extent, the general public looks at it from a very personal perspective, how they can manage their own fortunes and their own daily expenditure. And the technocrats and so on look at it from a more macro situation. But from a macro situation, I think we're moving in the right direction. What needs to be done now is to ensure that there's a great trickle down of those apparent benefits to the rank and file of the population. My peers in the market research field honored me by presenting me with a Lifetime Achievement Award for pioneering work in the market research. And it's something that really, struck me as being something really, I'm very proud of that, right? That was in 2003. In 2007, after I'd done 5 Olympic Games, the previous one to that being Athens in 2004, the government saw fit to award me with a national honor, the Order of Distinction Commander Class, CD, for my contribution to sports administration. That was in 2007. And in 2008, I went to, for me, the greatest games of them all, which was Beijing. From 1986, my first major games was the Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, 1988. I was the rookie. The biggest, most successful, most rewarding, most exciting, most humbling games that I have been to was the Beijing Olympics of 2008. I had the real privilege to have led the Jamaica team in the Beijing Games, which of course was the games that was a turning point for us in the Olympic movement, right? One Usain Bolt, of course, took the world by storm. And that stands out to me as the best of the games. I've been to 7, and if you ask me for a ranking of them all, I would say Beijing was by far the best. And I rather liked London again. It had a different kind of flavor. But Sydney, Beijing, and London were the best 3 of the 7 games that I've been to. Fantastic. The Beijing experience was just out of this world. In 2010, I decided I would put all that I have learned and heard about and experienced in a book. And this was before I went to London as the head of the delegation for those games in 2012. I published a book titled Seoul to Beijing, which talks to things that people wouldn't know about unless they were there in the intimate position that I was in. It's what happens behind the scenes, the problems that we work through, and far less on who won which medal. I'm currently, of course, still involved in sports in a big way because I'm chairman of the government's National Sport Museum Development Committee, and we're still to really get some action on that. And for all my sins in sports, I'm now the chairman of the Professional Football Association, which runs the Premier League. That's my current involvement in sport, and of course I went on to sit on a number of Caribbean sporting bodies as a result of my vice presidency. I was the director of the Central American and Caribbean Games. I was the director of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, and what is not widely known, I'm still a director of KNOC Broadcasting Inc., which was the body that brought the Rio Olympics to the region in 2016. I'm twice married. So in my very first marriage, my former wife unfortunately died 2 years ago, but I've been in a new marriage, pretty stable marriage, since 2003. And my first marriage produced 2 children, and my current marriage has produced 2 beautiful girls, one in high school and one in prep school. They have been a tower of strength to me consistently. I have quite often during my Olympic years had to leave them for extended periods of time, and I don't think anybody is happy with that. I wasn't, they weren't. But the bottom line is that they understood, and they certainly have been a real tower of strength to me in terms of allowing me the opportunity to do what I have done. And I'm still heavily involved in sports, and I feel quite often guilty leaving home or not getting home in time because I know I have my responsibilities there. I'm never, ever, ever, ever not remembered that I have a primary responsibility to my family. As a matter of fact, all my children have become involved in sports in a big way. All right. Karen, my oldest daughter, got to the point where she was Caribbean champion in squash, you know, and my 2 younger girls now are both big swimmers in the Tornadoes Club. My current wife has been with the organization for this is their 26th year. She got into market research right after graduating from university and been with the organization for 26 years. So I've been stepping back, you know, a little bit, not out of there by any means. And she's actually running the company day to day, and I really owe a lot to her for taking the baton, so to speak, and really running the organization in a very efficient way that allows me, first of all, the opportunity to do what I do in terms of lectures and in terms of the involvement in sports, and that to me is immeasurable. Wealth to me is, to a large extent, what you feel inside of you and what you can contribute to society. And to me, I feel a very rich person by virtue of the contribution I make through sports and through my political polling work. I don't measure wealth in terms of how much money you have, but certainly in terms of who you are and what you contribute to society.